Hello everyone, and welcome to this corner of stories that will leave you breathless. Before we dive into this tale of old money, silent power, and a spectacular public reckoning, I have a deal for you. Subscribe now and hit that bell so you don't miss any of our epic narratives. Your support is the spark that ignites every one of our stories. Imagine this. The air in the grand ballroom of the Sterling Manor in Boston was so thick you could almost cut it. It reeked of an intoxicating mix of generational wealth and the suffocating sweetness of night-blooming jasmine, a cloying combination of old Boston money and newly minted falseness. From her vantage point near the balconies overlooking the Beacon Hill skyline, Dr. Anya Sterling watched the party's reflection in the immaculate glass. She saw the glittering chandeliers, the guests whispering in tailored suits and silk gowns, but most clearly, she saw her husband, Trent Sterling, enter the room with a woman who was not his wife. The woman, Chloe Vance, clung to his arm like a bejeweled leech, her laughter sharp and triumphant. And in that instant, Anya knew the carefully constructed castle of her life was about to crumble. This was no ordinary party. It was a battlefield, and she had just watched the enemy raise their flag. The legacy and the gilded cage. The Sterling family was not merely rich, they were a dynasty. Their name was etched into the foundations of banks, universities, and the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Their ancestral home, a sprawling stone manor in the heart of the distinguished Beacon Hill neighborhood, was more than a residence. It was a monument to their legacy, with manicured gardens, an oak-paneled library guarding first-edition classics, and a ballroom that had hosted senators and governors. The estate was a kingdom. For the last decade, Anya Sterling had been its quiet, discreet queen. She hadn't been born into this world. Her background was one of modest means. Her parents were a university professor and a librarian. She met Trent Sterling in college, a whirlwind romance where she was swept away by his charm and the intoxicating allure of his world. She was intelligent, serene, and possessed a quiet grace that the family patriarch, Senator Harrison Sterling, found refreshing compared to the ambitious socialites his son usually dated. He had given his blessing, and Anya had dutifully assumed her role. She managed the manor with a silent efficiency often mistaken for meekness. She knew the name of every staff member, the favorite flower of every visiting dignitary, and the precise temperature at which Senator Sterling took his evening herbal tea. She was the silent engine that kept the Sterling Empire running flawlessly on the domestic front. While Trent handled the public aspects of Sterling Industries, closing deals and giving speeches, Anya ensured the home he returned to was a sanctuary of perfect order. But over the years, the gilded cage had begun to feel more like a prison. Trent's initial affection had cooled into a courteous, condescending indifference. He saw her not as a partner, but as a high-level domestic administrator. He took her loyalty for granted, mistaking her grace for weakness. Their conversations became transactional, revolving around schedules, events, and his father's needs. The shared laughter and late-night whispers of their youth were distant, faded echoes in the manor's cavernous hallways. Her only true ally in the house was Senator Harrison Sterling. The patriarch, now in his late 70s, and battling a degenerative illness that confined him to a wheelchair, was a man of few words but sharp perception. He had built his empire from the ground up and possessed an unsettling ability to see through facades. He saw the way Trent's eyes avoided Anya when she spoke. He saw the weary sadness that sometimes settled in her expression when she thought no one was looking. Senator Sterling and Anya forged a deep, unspoken bond. She spent hours in the library with him, reading his favorite history books aloud, or simply sitting in comfortable silence while he worked on his memoirs. She attended to his needs, not out of obligation, but out of genuine affection and respect. She saw the brilliant, formidable man beneath the frail exterior, and he, in turn, saw the steel backbone beneath her savoir-faire. "You have more of the Sterling spirit than he does," Senator Sterling had once murmured, his voice thin but clear, gesturing vaguely toward Trent's study. "Blood is not everything, Anya. Character is." The words had been a balm to her bruised soul, but they hadn't changed the reality of her marriage. 2 years ago, Chloe Vance entered their lives. She was a marketing executive at a firm Sterling Industries had acquired. Ambitious, beautiful in a sharp, predatory way, and utterly brazen. The affair began as whispers, and then became an open secret. Soon, Trent stopped trying to hide it entirely. He began bringing Chloe to corporate events, then to casual family dinners. Each appearance was a fresh humiliation for Anya. She endured the pitying glances of her friends and the smug, triumphant smiles of Chloe, who seized every opportunity to mark her territory. Chloe would casually mention a trip she and Trent had taken, a private joke they shared, or an intimate detail of his life that a wife should know. But Anya didn't know. Chloe was a constant public reminder of Anya's displacement. Yet, for the sake of Senator Sterling, Anya kept her head high, refusing to give Chloe the satisfaction of a public scene. She absorbed the pain, the disrespect, the slow-motion demolition of her marriage, and carried on. Her resilience was a silent act of defiance, a promise to herself that she would not break. But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that a breaking point was coming for all of them. The combat. The Charleston Gala. The annual Sterling Foundation Gala in Charleston, South Carolina, was the social event of the season. It was a night of performative charity, where the elite gathered to extend checks, drink fine wine, and reaffirm their place at the top of the societal food chain. But this year, the gala carried a deeper significance. It was a double celebration, the 30th anniversary of the foundation, and more importantly, Senator Harrison Sterling's 80th birthday. Anya had overseen every detail with meticulous care, from the string quartet softly playing in the foyer to the towering floral arrangements of white orchids and hydrangeas, all a testament to sober elegance, a reflection of Senator Sterling's own tastes. She wore a classic navy gown by a timeless designer, her only jewels the sapphire earrings that had been a gift from the senator years ago. She moved among the arriving guests with effortless grace, a warm smile for everyone, her voice a low, reassuring murmur in the rising tide of chatter. She was the consummate hostess, the very picture of sterling dignity. The party was in full swing when Trent finally made his entrance. He was not alone. Hooked on his arm was Chloe Vance, wrapped in a garish, blood-red dress that plunged dangerously low in the front and audaciously high in the back. It was a dress designed to be noticed, to scream for attention in a room that whispered. Her diamonds were bigger, her makeup heavier, her laugh louder than anyone else's. She was a splash of cheap paint on the canvas of an old master. A hush spread through the ballroom as they entered. Conversations cut short. Eyes darted from Anya to Trent and Chloe, then quickly darted away. It was one thing to take a mistress to a restaurant or a nightclub. It was quite another to bring her to the patriarch's birthday celebration, to the very heart of the family home. It was a declaration of war. Trent, to his credit, looked momentarily uncomfortable. He had the decency to avoid his wife's gaze, his eyes fixed on some point over her shoulder. But Chloe's smile was one of pure, venomous triumph. She scanned the room like the newly crowned queen, her eyes finally settling on Anya. She tightened her grip on Trent's arm, a possessive gesture for all to see. Anya felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, waiting for her to crumble. to yell, to make a scene. She felt the blood drain from her face, but her training, her years of practiced composure, kicked in. She straightened her back, raised her chin, and held her ground. She would not allow this woman to destroy a night dedicated to Senator Sterling. She saw her brother-in-law Robert and his wife Claire shoot her a look of horrified compassion. Claire began to move toward her, but Anya gave a slight, almost imperceptible negative shake of her head. Not now. Don't make it worse. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of her own making. She watched as Trent guided Chloe toward the central bar, bypassing his father, who was seated in a large armchair near the fireplace, surveying the room with clouded yet discerning eyes. Senator Sterling's expression was unreadable, but Anya knew him well enough to see the flash of deep disappointment, the tension in his jaw. He had seen the entrance, and he had seen his son's cowardice. The night wore on, every minute an agonizing exercise in self-control for Anya. She continued her duties, speaking to donors, directing staff, and ensuring Senator Sterling was comfortable. All the while, she was painfully aware of Chloe's presence. The woman was a gravitational force of disruption, pulling Trent into her orbit and leaving a trail of uncomfortable silence wherever she went. She moved from group to group, introducing herself with a confidence that bordered on arrogance, her voice ringing across the room as she regaled people with stories that invariably featured her jewelry. Anya felt herself dissociate, watching the scene as if it were a play. There was the dutiful wife, the cheating husband, the vulgar mistress, the observant patriarch. The script felt old, tired, and profoundly humiliating. She had played her part with quiet dignity for 2 long years. But tonight, the stage lights felt intolerably hot, the gaze of the audience unbearably heavy. Something had to give. The foundations of her carefully managed world were cracking, and she could hear the rumble of its impending collapse. The moment of ignition arrived, as it often does, from a trivial incident. Anya was standing by Senator Sterling's chair, quietly asking if he needed anything, when one of the younger waiters, a nervous boy named Leo, accidentally bumped into a guest while carrying a tray of champagne flutes. One of the glasses toppled, splashing a few drops of champagne onto the sleeve of Chloe's crimson dress. "Oh, I'm so sorry, ma'am," stammered Leo, his face flushed with mortification as he fumbled for a napkin. Chloe recoiled as if struck. "Watch where you're going, you clumsy oaf," she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the ambient music and conversation. Several nearby guests turned to look. Anya stepped forward instinctively, her hostess instincts kicking in. "It's all right, Leo," she said softly, placing a reassuring hand on the young man's arm before turning to Chloe. "It was just a small accident. I'm sure it will dry without a stain." Her tone was polite, neutral, intended to placate. But Chloe wasn't interested in placation. She had been looking for a stage, a moment to assert her dominance over Anya. And this was it. She looked Anya up and down with a sneer of contempt, taking in the simple, elegant gown and the quiet authority with which she had spoken. "You'd know all about cleaning up messes, wouldn't you?" Chloe said, her voice dripping with condescension. She turned to Trent, who had just approached to see the commotion. She hooked her arm through his, gluing herself to him. "Seriously, Trent, why do you even keep her around? Paid staff is more useful." She paused, and her voice rose to a pitch that rang out in the silence. "Tell your little maidservant to fetch me another glass of champagne, and this time make sure she doesn't spill it." The word hung in the air, ugly and obscene. Maidservant. The entire ballroom seemed to go mute at once. The string quartet faltered. A violin squeaked in the sudden silence before ceasing altogether. Every head turned, every eye fixed on the tableau by the fireplace. The humiliated wife, the triumphant mistress, the weak husband, and the silent patriarch. Anya felt the word like a physical blow. It was the culmination of every silent slight, every stolen weekend, every pitying glance she had endured for 2 years. All her pain, her rage, her suffocating sense of injustice coalesced into a single, blinding point of white-hot fury. For a split second, she saw herself lunging forward. She felt the imagined satisfaction of wiping the smug smile off Chloe's face. But she didn't. Instead, a strange and terrible calm descended upon her. Her breathing evened out. Her hands, which had clenched into fists at her sides, slowly relaxed. She met Chloe's cruel, bright eyes with a gaze as cold and clear as ice. She didn't need to scream. Her silence was a weapon in itself. Trent looked utterly lost. He looked from Chloe's hard, expectant face to Anya's chillingly serene one. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, like a fish gasping for air. He did nothing. He said nothing. His inaction was a confession, a verdict, a final, unforgivable betrayal. He wasn't her husband. He was simply the man she was married to. Chloe's smile widened. She thought she had won. She had publicly denigrated her rival, sealing her with the ultimate insult in this world of class and status. And Trent had not defended her. In her mind, the battle was over. But she had miscalculated fatally. She had played her scene for the wrong audience. She thought the most powerful person in the room was Trent, the apparent heir. She had forgotten the king. From his armchair, Senator Harrison Sterling began to move. A collective gasp swept the room as the senator, with a strength that seemed to defy his frail condition, pushed himself up from his chair. He waved off the worried butler who rushed to his side, his eyes burning with a cold fire fixed on the scene before him. All the power, all the authority in the room that had momentarily shifted to Chloe now snapped back and focused on him. He ignored Anya and his son. His gaze fell directly and with crushing weight upon Chloe Vance. "Miss Vance," he began. His voice was not loud, but it echoed into every corner of the dead, silent room with the force of a judge delivering a sentence. "For 2 years, I have tolerated your presence on the fringes of my family. I have watched you operate. I believed my son's infatuation was a temporary lapse in otherwise sound judgment. It appears I was wrong on every count." Chloe's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flash of uncertainty. "Senator Sterling, He raised a single trembling hand, and she fell silent. "You walk into my home, a home built upon 3 generations of integrity and hard work," he continued, his voice laced with contempt. "You wear a dress paid for with my family's money, drink my family's champagne, and stand on my family's floors. And from this position of profound privilege, a privilege you have done nothing to earn, you dare to insult the single person in this room who has demonstrated more character, more grace, and more dignity than you could possibly comprehend." He took one more step closer now, his eyes sweeping her, from her expensive shoes to her perfectly coiffed hair. "You mistake wealth for class. You mistake arrogance for strength. You see this house, this family, as a prize to be won, a corporation to be taken. You are a parasite, Miss Vance, and you have just revealed the depth of your own vulgarity to all." Chloe's face, once a mask of triumph, had paled to a sickly white. She looked to Trent for support, but he remained frozen, his face a mask of horror as he watched his father systematically dismantle his mistress. Senator Sterling then turned his piercing gaze upon his son. The disappointment in his eyes was a tangible thing, a force that made Trent physically recoil. "And you," Senator Sterling said, his voice now filled with a deep, sorrowful anger. "My son, I have watched you become a stranger. You have a wife of impeccable character, a woman who has supported you, cared for you, and tended to your father in his old age with a tenderness you have never shown. A woman who has endured your public humiliations with a stoicism that should have shamed you into being a better man." He gestured with his cane toward Anya, who stood still as a statue, tears silently tracing paths down her cheeks. "Look at her, Trent. Look at the woman you discarded for this." The disgust in his voice as he glanced at Chloe was absolute. "You have not only broken your vows to her," Senator Sterling declared, his voice rising in strength. "You have broken my trust. You have dishonored our name. You believe because you bear the Sterling name you are entitled to the Sterling fortune, this house, this legacy. You have never understood. The name is not a privilege. It is a responsibility. A responsibility you have failed spectacularly to uphold." The public reprimand was brutal, surgical, and complete. Trent's face was livid. He was no longer the powerful heir of Sterling Industries. He was a boy being scolded by his father in front of all his peers. The power dynamic of his entire life had just been shattered, irrevocably. Senator Sterling took a deep, shaky breath, leaning heavily on his cane. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were clear and determined. He had delivered his judgment. Now it was time for the sentence. "Mr. Thorne," he called, his voice ringing with authority, "if you would be so kind." A burly, silver-haired man in a sober suit, the family's longtime attorney, stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, carrying a leather briefcase. The final act was about to begin. The king's verdict. The Sterling Manor deed. Mr. George Thorne, the Sterling family attorney for over 40 years, navigated the sea of stunned guests who parted for him. His face was a professional mask of neutrality, but his eyes held a glimmer of what could only be described as grim satisfaction. He approached Senator Sterling and handed him the mahogany leather briefcase. The senator took it with a firm hand, not opening it immediately. Instead, he surveyed the room, his gaze sweeping over the shocked faces of his friends, business partners, and relatives. He was not just a father reprimanding his son. He was a king holding court, ensuring his decree was witnessed by all. "This house," he began, his voice ringing with a quiet power that commanded absolute attention, "is more than bricks and mortar. It is the heart of our family. My grandfather laid the first stone with his own hands. My father filled these rooms with art and music. I filled them with my own children, hoping they would understand what this place represents: honor and vixie. It is a testament that what we build must outlast us." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. His eyes met Trent's again, and they were no longer filled with anger, but a deep, sharp finality. "A legacy is not passed down by blood alone," Senator Sterling said, his voice clear and unyielding. "It must be earned. It must be respected. It must be nurtured. You, Trent, have treated this house as a hotel and its mistress as a concierge. You do not comprehend its value, and therefore you are no longer worthy of its stewardship." He then turned to Anya. The harshness in his expression softened, replaced by a look of profound paternal affection and deep respect. He beckoned her forward with a gentle nod. Anya moved as if in a dream, stepping forward until she stood directly in front of him. She looked at her hands, unable to meet his gaze, overwhelmed by the sudden, fierce defense of her honor. "Anya," Senator Sterling said, his voice now gentle, "look at me." Slowly she raised her head. His eyes were kind, and in their depths, she saw a validation she had starved for years. "For 10 years, he said, speaking to her, but ensuring everyone could hear. "You have been the true keeper of this family's soul. You have tended to this house not as an administrator, but as a guardian. You have cared for an old man with patience and love. You have endured betrayal with a strength I can only admire. You have shown loyalty, grace, and resilience in the face of profound disrespect. You, my dear, understand what it means to be a sterling far better than my own son ever has. He opened the leather briefcase. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue satin, was a thick document tied with a ribbon. He lifted it carefully. "The laws of man say what is mine I can pass to my son," Senator Sterling declared. "But the laws of decency and justice demand what is earned be given to the worthy." He held the document out to her. "This," his voice rang out with triumph, "is the deed to the Sterling Manor. Every square foot of this land, every stone of this mansion, every piece of furniture and art within its walls, I have spent the last 6 months working with Mr. Thorne to transfer the sole and unassailable ownership. It is all legally and irrevocably in your name with immediate effect." He placed the deed into Anya's trembling hands. "This house," Senator Harrison Sterling proclaimed, his voice booming through the astonished silence, "belongs to its true mistress." Anya looked down at the document. Her name, Anya Morgan Sterling, was written in bold, clear script. It was real. The weight of the paper in her hands was the weight of freedom, of justice, of a future she had never dared to imagine. The gilded cage was hers, and now she held the key. For a long moment, the only sound was the contained breath of over 100 people. Then the silence was broken. "No!" shrieked Chloe. Her voice, a raw and ugly sound. "That's impossible. It's his birthright. Trent, do something!" Trent was white as a sheet, his mouth agape. He looked from the deed in Anya's hands to his father's resolute face, his mind struggling to process the catastrophic shift that had just occurred. The manor, the centerpiece of his inheritance, the symbol of his identity, was gone, given to the wife he had ignored. "Father, you can't," he stammered, his voice weak and pleading. "This is our home." "It was your home," Senator Sterling corrected him coldly. "It is now Anya's home. You are a guest here, as is your companion." Anya finally looked up from the deed. The shock was receding, replaced by a wave of empowerment so potent it was dizzying. The tears on her face had dried, and her eyes, when they met Chloe's, were no longer soft and forgiving. They were shards of sapphire, hard and bright. She took a step toward Chloe, who was still clinging to Trent's arm like a drowning woman. "I believe," Anya said, her voice perfectly calm and level, cutting through Chloe's rising hysteria, "that the party is over." She held the deed up slightly for emphasis. "As the owner of this house, I must ask you to leave." She paused for effect. "Now." Chloe stared at her, her face a contorted mask of disbelief and rage. "You can't do this, Trent!" But Trent was a broken man. He was looking at Anya as if seeing her for the first time, not as an accessory to his home, but as a woman who held all the power. Anya's gaze shifted to him. The years of pain, of silent suffering, were in her eyes, but so was unyielding finality. "You too, Trent," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "You have dishonored me in my home for the last time. Pack your things. I will have the staff deliver your bags to the gatehouse. You have 1 hour. Anya, please," he pleaded, taking a step toward her. "We can talk this through." "There is nothing left to talk about," she replied, turning her back on him. A gesture of dismissal more absolute than any argument. "Head of security, please escort Miss Vance and Mr. Sterling off the premises." 2 burly men in discreet dark suits materialized, moving with silent efficiency. One placed a firm hand on Chloe's arm. She tried to wriggle free. Her voice rose to a high-pitched shriek. "Get your hands off me! Trent, don't let them do this!" But Trent did not move. He simply stared at the life he had just lost. The security guard firmly guided the spluttering, furious Chloe toward the main entrance. The other guard stood patiently beside Trent. Defeated, Trent turned and began the long, humiliating walk out of his own home, followed by the guard. Guests parted to let them through, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a certain grim satisfaction. The drama was over, and a new order had been established. When the massive oak doors closed behind them, a scattering of applause broke out. Started by Trent's formidable aunt, who had always despised Chloe, soon the entire room was clapping. They were not just applauding the drama, they were applauding Anya. They recognized the silent strength she had shown for years, and the poetic justice they had just witnessed. Anya stood tall, the deed held firmly in her hand. She gave a small, grateful nod to Senator Sterling, who looked exhausted, but deeply contented. He had secured his legacy by placing it in the most capable hands. He hadn't lost a son. He had crowned a queen. Anya addressed her guests, a slow, genuine smile finally reaching her lips. "If you'll excuse me," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I have some domestic matters to attend to." Conclusion and call to action, CTAs. At its core, this is not just a story about a cheating husband or a scorned wife. It is a story about the true nature of value. Chloe and Trent saw value in money, status, and fleeting passion. But Senator Sterling and Anya understood that real value resides in character, loyalty, and quiet dignity. The Sterling Manor was not just a prize, it was a symbol, and it was finally entrusted to the person who appreciated what it represented. Anya's victory was not just gaining the house, it was the powerful affirmation that her silent strength was worth more than all of Trent's inherited privilege and Chloe's loud ambition. She proved that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who has patiently earned the right to speak the last word. Your opinion matters. Do you think Senator Sterling acted correctly in choosing character over his own lineage? What would you have done in Anya's place when you heard the word maidservant in the ballroom? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonated and made you feel that poetic justice exists, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that silent strength always prevails. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story of valor and triumph. Until next time, the second battle, the resurgence of resentment. Part 5. The second battle, the Sterling legacy under siege, the new reign and the old enemy. The days following the gala were a whirlwind of decisive action. The story of what happened at Senator Sterling's 80th birthday spread through their social circles like wildfire, becoming an instant legend. The narrative was clear. The quiet, dignified wife had finally vanquished the vulgar mistress and the worthless husband, backed by the patriarch's unyielding judgment. Dr. Anya Sterling was no longer viewed with pity, but with newfound awe and respect. Her first priority was Senator Sterling. She moved his suite of rooms to the sunniest wing of the manor, overlooking the rose gardens he loved. She hired the best private nursing care to complement her own, ensuring he was never lacking comfort or company. His health seemed to rally with the resolution of his family crisis. A great weight had been lifted, and he spent his days quietly dictating his memoirs to a stenographer, with Anya by his side. Her second act was to file for divorce. Trent, humiliated and desperate, tried to contest it, tried to see her, sending endless texts and leaving tearful voicemails. He begged for a second chance, promising he would end things with Chloe, but he had made one terrible mistake, too many. Anya instructed her attorney, a shark recommended by Mr. Thorne, to ignore it all. The trust was broken beyond repair. The settlement was swift and brutal. Trent was left with the trust fund his grandfather had established for him, enough to live comfortably, but not opulently. He was barred from Sterling Industries, and the senator signed over his controlling shares to a professional board, with a significant portion held in trust for future charitable works in Anya's name. Trent had lost his home, his inheritance, his wife, and his father's respect in one single night. Chloe Vance vanished. Once it became clear that Trent was no longer the golden goose, her calls and texts ceased. She was eliminated from the Sterling Industries corporate roster and disappeared from the Charleston social scene as quickly as she had arrived. A mere footnote in the Sterling family saga. Meanwhile, Anya was undergoing a profound transformation. With the weight of her unhappy marriage lifted, she blossomed. She began taking a more active role in the Sterling Foundation, shifting its focus toward causes she was passionate about: education for underprivileged women and arts programs for children. She proved to have a keen business sense, much like Senator Sterling, and the foundation's endowment grew under her leadership. She did not wander the vast manor, alone and lost. Instead, she filled it with life. She hosted fundraisers, chamber music concerts, and tertulias for artists and thinkers. She invited her own family, the professor and the librarian, to stay for long stretches, their quiet, intellectual warmth filling the halls that had once echoed with tension. The house, once a symbol of her confinement, was now the seat of her power and her platform for good. It was no longer a gilded cage, but a vibrant, thriving kingdom. Months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Anya stood on the main balcony, the same one from which she had often watched Trent leave for his trysts. She held a glass of wine, looking out over the sprawling gardens that sloped down to the shimmering waters of the Ashley River. The air was filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant sound of an orchestra tuning up for a charity event she was hosting. She was no longer Anya, the quiet wife of Trent Sterling. She was Dr. Anya Sterling, matriarch of the Sterling Manor, a philanthropist, a leader. She hadn't inherited her position. She had earned it through silent strength and unyielding character. They had called her a maidservant in her own house. In response, fate and a wise old man had handed her the entire kingdom. And as she looked over her domain, she smiled. Finally, truly, she was home. The resurgence of resentment. A year passed. The seasons changed, painting the grounds of the Sterling estate with the vibrant greens of summer, the fiery hues of autumn, and the austere, elegant white of winter. Under Anya's stewardship, the manor was more alive than ever. It was no longer a silent museum of inherited wealth, but a center of purpose and culture. Senator Sterling, though physically weaker, remained mentally lucid. His days were spent in the sun-drenched library, Anya often reading to him, their bond the stable, unbreakable core of the new home. He watched her command her new life with a profound paternal pride. He had made the right choice. He had secured his legacy by betting on character over lineage, and his gamble had paid off. The ghosts of Trent and Chloe seemed to have faded. After the divorce was finalized, Trent was reported to have moved down to the coast, licking his wounds and living a quieter life on his now significantly reduced trust fund. Chloe had disappeared from the social pages entirely. For the first time in a decade, Anya felt a sense of peace, a belief that the past was finally behind her. But the past is never entirely gone. It is simply waiting for an opportunity to reassert itself. The opportunity arrived on a Tuesday morning in October, delivered by a courier. It was a thick, formal envelope bearing the letterhead of a prestigious Atlanta law firm she didn't recognize. Inside, nestled among pages of dense legal technicalities, was a petition filed in the Superior Court of South Carolina. The petitioner was Trent Sterling. The defendant was Anya Sterling. And the claim was that the transfer of the Sterling Manor property was null and void. Trent was suing her. Not only was he demanding a share of the asset, but he was demanding the whole thing. The grounds were as insidious as they were cruel. He alleged that at the time of the signing, his father, Senator Harrison Sterling, was suffering from diminished mental capacity and was a victim of undue influence by his then daughter-in-law. The petition painted a vile picture. It portrayed Anya not as a devoted caregiver, but as a cunning, manipulative gold digger who had taken advantage of an ill, vulnerable old man and systematically isolated him from his own son, poisoning his mind against his rightful heir to seize the family's greatest treasure for herself. Anya read the words, and the quiet, orderly world she had built began to shake. The fury that rose in her was cold and sharp. This was not the desperate pleading of the broken man who had been escorted out of her house. This was a calculated, venomous assault designed to destroy not only her ownership of the house, but her reputation, her character, and the very foundations of her new life. He was trying to rewrite history, casting himself as the victim and her as the villain. Her first call was to Mr. Thorne. The old attorney's voice was grim. "I feared this might happen, Anya. A cornered animal is dangerous. Trent has nothing to lose and a world to gain. His lawyers are sharks. This will be ugly." The ugliness began almost immediately. News of the lawsuit leaked to the press, and suddenly, the narrative that had once favored her began to splinter. Tabloid articles appeared with speculative headlines. Sterling family war, caretaker wife, conned ailing patriarch. Old photos of her and Trent, in happier times, were juxtaposed with photos of her now, looking serene and powerful at foundation events. The insinuation was clear. Worse was the reaction within the family. Trent's brother, Robert, and his wife, Claire, who had applauded her victory at the gala, now arrived at the manor with faces lined with worry. "Anya, we know this is absurd," Robert began, shifting uncomfortably in the formal drawing room. "We were there. We saw what happened. But a public court battle, the things Trent is alleging, it will drag the family name through the mud." "He is dragging my name through the mud," Anya corrected him, her voice steel. "Of course, and it's despicable," Claire quickly added, her tone placating. "But his lawyers will subpoena Senator Sterling's medical records, force him to testify, to be evaluated by their doctors. Think of the stress on him in his condition. There has to be another way. A settlement, perhaps. Give Trent a fraction of the value, enough to make him go away." Anya stared at them, a wave of profound disappointment washing over her. She had thought they were her allies, but their loyalty was to the family's pristine public image, not to her, or even the truth. They saw her not as the injured party, but as an obstacle to a quiet, clean resolution. They wanted her to pay the man who had mistreated and humiliated her for years simply to avoid a scandal. "No," Anya said, the word final and absolute. "There will be no settlement. I will not pay my abuser a single dollar for the privilege of being defamed by him. Your father knew exactly what he was doing, and his wishes were perfectly clear. I will not allow Trent to profane his father's legacy and my honor just to avoid some bad press." Robert and Claire exchanged a frustrated look. "Anya, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," she interrupted, standing to signal the end of the conversation. "I am defending the truth. Trent started this war. I intend to finish it." After they left, the vast house felt silent and imposing once more. The battle she thought she had won a year ago turned out to be only the opening salvo. The real war was about to begin, and this time, she was fighting not just for a house, but for her very identity. She walked to the library where Senator Sterling dozed in his wheelchair, a book open on his lap. She watched the gentle rise and fall of his chest and felt a surge of protective resolve. Trent wanted a fight. He had forgotten who he was dealing with. He remembered the quiet, submissive wife. He was about to be reintroduced to the woman who now owned his world. Black pawn. The ultimate proof and the checkmate. The legal battle began in earnest, a grueling process of depositions and discovery motions. Trent's lawyers were relentless. They subpoenaed years of financial records, household staff rosters, and private emails, searching for any scrap of evidence they could twist to fit their narrative. The centerpiece of their strategy was the deposition of Anya herself. They sat across from one another in a sterile, wood-paneled conference room in Atlanta. Trent was there, looking thinner, harder, his eyes filled with a resentful fire. He avoided looking directly at her, whispering to his lead attorney, a predatory-looking man named Mark Torres. For 6 hours, Torres interrogated Anya. He was condescending, invasive, and deeply personal. He brought up her modest background, insinuating she had married Trent for money. He questioned every large purchase she had made, every trip she had taken. He twisted her stewardship of the home into a campaign to control every aspect of Senator Sterling's life. "Isn't it true, Dr. Sterling," Torres sneered at one point, "that you systematically fired staff loyal to Mr. Trent Sterling and replaced them with people loyal only to you?" "I replaced staff who were incompetent or disrespectful," Anya calmly countered, her hands folded on the table. "My loyalty was to the proper functioning of the home and the welfare of my father-in-law, who was the owner of the house." "Your father-in-law, whom you admit was gravely ill," Torres jabbed. "So ill, in fact, that he was easy to confuse, easy to manipulate." "My father-in-law was physically frail, but his mind was, and is, as sharp as a razor," she said, her voice like ice. "A fact you will soon discover." Throughout the ordeal, Anya remained unyielding. The woman who once flinched at a harsh word now met every attack with poise and precision. She answered every question with the simple, unvarnished truth. Her composure clearly unnerved Trent and frustrated his attorney. They had expected her to crumble, to become emotional and contradictory. They had utterly underestimated her. Following the deposition, Anya met with Mr. Thorne. "They have nothing, Anya," the attorney assured her. "It's all insinuation, but their entire case rests on convincing a judge that Senator Sterling's mind was failing. They will push for a court-ordered competency hearing. It will be a circus." "They won't get the chance," Anya said, a look of quiet determination in her eyes. "Senator Sterling and I prepared for this. Trent thinks his father is his pawn. He forgot he was always the best player in the game." A week later, Anya instructed Thorne to make an offer to opposing counsel. It wasn't a settlement. It was an invitation. She invited Trent, Robert, and their respective attorneys to a private meeting at the Sterling Manor. The purpose, she stated, was to present new evidence that would void their lawsuit. Curiosity and arrogance led them to accept. They arrived the following afternoon, convening in the great library, the very heart of Senator Sterling's domain. Senator Sterling himself was not present. Anya had insisted he not be subjected to the stress. Trent walked into the room with a swagger, assuming the invitation was a sign of weakness, a prelude to a settlement offer. Robert and Claire looked simply anxious, hoping to mediate an end to the family's public humiliation. "Thank you all for coming," Anya began, standing before the large mahogany desk. "You have put my character, and more gravely, Senator Sterling's cognitive state, on trial. You have accused me of manipulating a frail old man. Before we proceed with this farce in court, I thought it only fair that you hear from the victim himself." Mark Torres sneered. If you think putting an ailing man on the stand to give a coached statement will help your case, he won't be taking the stand, Anya said, pointing to a large television screen that had been discreetly installed on the wall. He already has. She pressed a button on a remote. The screen sprang to life. It showed Senator Harrison Sterling sitting in that very library in his favorite armchair. He looked frail, yes, but his eyes were clear, intelligent, and piercing. He was looking directly into the camera. The date and timestamp in the corner of the screen read 6:30 p.m. on the night of the gala, just 2 hours after he had signed the final deed transfer documents with Mr. Thorne, who was seated just out of frame. "I am Harrison Sterling," he began, his voice raspy but firm. "I am recording this statement of my own free will, in full use of my faculties, to clarify the legal and moral reasoning behind my decision to transfer the title of my home to my daughter-in-law, Anya Morgan Sterling." Trent's face went white. Robert leaned forward, his expression frozen in shock. "My son, Trent," Senator Sterling continued, his gaze unyielding, "believes this house is his birthright. A birthright is a concept for kings and fools. In the real world, things of value must be earned or at least respected. Trent has done neither." Senator Sterling then systematically and with devastating precision recounted Trent's years of neglect, his cruelty toward Anya, and his profound lack of character. "Bringing that woman, Chloe Vance, into my home on the night of my birthday was not just an insult to his wife. It was a final demonstration of his pathetic weakness. A man who cannot control his own basic impulses cannot be trusted to steward a legacy." The camera appeared to zoom slightly on Senator Sterling's face. "Let me be perfectly clear for any court or any person who might question my mental state. This was not an act of anger. It was an act of clarity. I have watched Anya for 10 years. I have seen her integrity, her strength, her compassion. She has honored the responsibilities Trent has shirked. She has shown more sterling character than he ever has. The house is not a reward. It is a recognition of who she is." Senator Sterling's gaze then seemed to soften, but his words sharpened. "And to my other son, Robert," he said, and Robert visibly winced. "You may wonder why I did not pass the property to you. It is because your defining characteristic has always been conflict avoidance. You are a good man, but you are not strong. You would have appeased Trent. You would have sold the estate to keep the peace. You would not have fought for it. Anya will." The video ended. Senator Harrison Sterling from the past had delivered the final, unassailable judgment. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by a small, strangled sound from Trent. He stared at the blank screen, his face ashen. He had been so sure of his father's weakness, so convinced of his own victimization. In 5 minutes, his father had dismantled his entire case, his entire sense of self, with cold, hard truth. Anya remained silent, allowing the weight of Senator Sterling's words to fill the room. There was no triumph on her face, only a mournful finality. Mark Torres was the first to speak, clearing his throat. "This is highly unorthodox, but compelling." He knew, as did everyone in the room, that the video was a silver bullet. No judge would rule against such clear and compelling evidence of Senator Sterling's intent and lucidity. The lawsuit was dead. The next morning, Trent's lawyers formally withdrew the petition. It was over. Trent left the manor that day without another word. Robert and Claire approached Anya before departing, their faces humbled. "He was right, Anya," Robert said, his voice heavy with regret. "About me, about everything. Forgive us for doubting you." Anya simply nodded. The war was finally, truly over. She had fought for her home, her honor, and the legacy of Senator Sterling. And she had won. Standing alone in this quiet library, she looked out the window at the sprawling gardens. The echoes of the past had faded, replaced by the promise of a future she would build on her own terms. A future built not on birthright, but on character. Conclusion and final call to action. At its core, this is not just a story about a cheating husband or a scorned wife. It is a story about the true nature of value. Chloe and Trent saw value in money, status, and fleeting passion. But Senator Sterling and Dr. Anya Sterling understood that real value resides in character, loyalty, and quiet dignity. The Sterling Manor was not just a prize, it was a symbol, and it was finally entrusted to the person who appreciated what it represented. Anya's victory was the powerful affirmation that her silent strength was worth more than all of Trent's inherited privilege and all of Chloe's loud ambition. She proved that sometimes the most powerful person in the room is not the one who shouts the loudest, but the one who has patiently earned the right to speak the last word. Your opinion matters. Do you think Senator Sterling was too harsh on Robert, the brother who was conflict avoidant? Was the $500,000 video the ultimate strategic move? Let us know your opinions in the comments. If this story resonated and made you feel that poetic justice exists, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs a reminder that silent strength always prevails. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story of valor and triumph. Until next time.